Hello and welcome to my channel. I am Zodiac Bandit, and today we have some spoilers for Campaign 3 up to episode 108. So if you aren't caught up yet, I recommend clicking off, getting caught up, and then coming back and watching this video. So ever since the party made it to Vasselheim, I've had a few burning questions just waiting to be answered. And luckily we've had a few of them answered, like, are we going to see more members of Vox Machina appear? Are we going to see the Mighty Nine appear? They were mentioned, they didn't appear yet. Are we going to see more gods? Are we going to run into more gods? Luckily, we have seen a few so far. So a handful of the questions that I've had have been answered since their arrival at Vasselheim. However, there is still one burning question that is bothering me to the core because, realistically, it should be answered, or should have already been answered. And that question is, where is Deanna, F.R.I.D.A, and Prism? So I need you to cast your minds back 44 episodes to episode 64, where the two groups that were separated during the initial attack on the dig site, or the Malleus Key, where Ludinus, created the bloody bridge and then sent the party in two. One half went to Wildmount, the other half went to Isilra. But eventually they came back together in Jushar. And then after that, the party and their newfound friends in Prism, Deanna, and F.R.I.D.A decided to split again with the, that other new group forming, would go to the Jushar libraries to see if they can learn any information that could be helpful for the party. And then from there, they'd be going to Vasselheim. And this is why I'm curious as to where the hell they are. Because realistically, enough time has likely passed to where the party should be meeting the other party in Vasselheim. And we still haven't even heard from them yet. There's been no messages, nothing coming from either way. But then the party of the Bell's Hells made it to Vasselheim, and they had a very public showing at the Platinum Sanctuary in front of literally everyone in Vasselheim. It was in front of the most important people, even people from just around Exandria. So likely everybody was here at this meeting. So if the other team is in Vasselheim right now, they would know that the Bell's Hells are now officially here in Vasselheim. So why haven't they reached out? Now this has sent me down a rabbit hole of sorts, two different ideas that could explain why this group hasn't reached out to the party quite yet. And the first one being, it's probably rather difficult to break into a library or to sneak into a library and get the information they're looking for, especially if it's restricted, much like the information that the Grim Verity stole from the very same library. So it's probably incredibly difficult unless two events have happened back to back. A mass rising of undead could be a big one that could draw some people away, which would be very beneficial to Deanna, F.R.I.D.A, and Prism if they needed a way to sort of draw guards away. But then another event quickly following after, where all of the most important leaders of Exandria are being in the Platinum Sanctuary, that could also draw guards away, and we know how heavily guarded that place was. So it's very likely that this group was waiting for a moment where the defenses of the library were a lot weaker than they were before to sneak in. So the party likely wouldn't, be known to them because they're currently sneaking in to the library and are probably still there likely. It has been a few days since the party arrived in Vasselheim, and it's very likely that they're not still there, but during the Platinum Sanctuary meeting, it's likely that they did in fact go to the library, and that's why they haven't made themselves known yet, because maybe they just truly don't know about the dealings going on inside the Platinum Sanctuary. But that rabbit hole sent me down a different rabbit hole, and made me think of something a little bit different. Could Prism, Deanna, and F.R.I.D.A have even made it to Vasselheim yet? Have they still been traveling on the road? Did they make it there? And are they doing the other part of the plan where they are snuck into the library now? Or are they stuck somewhere else in the world and can't make it to Vasselheim quite yet? So to answer that insane question, we have to figure out how many days it's been since the parties split. How many days has it been since Prism, Deanna, and F.R.I.D.A set out on their journey to investigate both of the libraries that they need to get any information for the party to, find useful or not? So in order to do that, we have to look at the events that have transpired since the two groups have split and get a rough idea of how many days it's been. Keep in mind, rough idea, because I would have to go back over all of those episodes, all 44, to answer this question, and that is an impossible task. So a lot of this is going to be based on memory and a little bit of research that I've done in the background. So it took 3 to 4 days of them going to Zephyra so they could heal up Keyleth, which was the first thing they did after splitting from the other party. Then, the Bell's Hells went to the Shattered Teeth for a few days, and they also went to that far-off mountain to get the crystal, the elemental crystal for Fern. They then spent a handful of days, 2 to 3 days, in Whitestone doing various stuff. One was sort of dealing with their own personal issues before they tried to absorb the crystal into Ashton, and then had to deal with more personal issues. So they spent a handful of days there. They then went to the Fey Realm for a bit, but the Fey Realm was some sort of, time dilation stuff, so they didn't really have to worry about how many days they spent there. After that, they went to Rudis, where they spent at least 3 days on Rudis. They then spent 1 day in the Hellcatch Valley after returning from Rudis after having lost FCG, and then they spent 1 day in Rexentrum making their clothing and having a debacle over a sword that should be used or not. They then spent 2 days messing about in Aor, 1 day traveling around because Essek missed the teleportation a few times because Aor magic is weird, and then 1 more day just messing around in Aor itself. So in total, if we go low ball, that's 14 days. If we go high ball, that is 17 days. So I think it's fair to say that it's somewhere between 15 to 16 days has transpired since the groups have split. However, there could be a few more days that could be added, a handful of days of just resting there, resting here that I've forgotten. So I would say the 15, 16, 17 area is probably the right amount of days that have taken place, maybe a few more. So we have half a month at the least that has been spent since they have split from the other group. Now, 15 days doesn't sound like a whole lot for 44 episodes, but keep in mind there has been some, time is a weird soup thing going on with when they spent time in the Fey Realm, and there was, I think, 2 or 3 episodes dedicated to that. And then on top of that, we had side stories for the Crown Keepers so that we could reintroduce Dorian to the story. And then even more so on top of that, we've had another side story for Downfall. So I think right there we've had, 7 episodes taken up of the 44, which does decrease it quite a bit. So realistically, 44 episodes covering that much time, and a handful of them were combat-centric episodes, it makes a decent amount of sense that 44 episodes translates to 15 days. Now, they have also gone up quite a few levels in this time, but I feel like that's pretty average for a D&D game where a handful of days or a handful of months equals characters hitting level 20. I feel like that's not totally impossible for especially a milestone game. So while it seems like that's not a lot of time to have transpired for them to have grown in their strength, it is relatively normal for a D&D game. So then the question becomes, how long does it take for one to travel from Jushar to Vasselheim? And the only way to answer this question is to cast our minds back to Campaign 1 into the first arc of the story, where Vox Machina took a skyship from Iman to Vasselheim. This is the only proven bit of travel that we've been given for the time that it takes to go from one city to another city. And that was by airship, which is good because we know there's airships in Jushar. Yes, technically those airships are, for, transporting troops to the Hellcatch Valley at the time. But with Prism being a member of the Cobalt Soul, I do think it's relatively reasonable she could get them onto one of those Vasselheim-bound ships. But there are other ways that she could travel around. We'll just get to that in a minute. But first of all, back to the Vox Machina example of how long it took to get to Iman from Vasselheim. It was 6 days, as you can see right here in front of you. Thank God Critical Role Stats was tracking some of these things before they unfortunately closed their doors. Rest in peace, Crit Role Stats. So, 6 days to go from Iman to Vasselheim, and, that was nice. 6 days. That gives us a nice map that we can use. So, as you can see here on the map, and there is no, unfortunately, no official world map yet. This is a fan-made map. So, this is all we have. So, as you can see, one line to the other, and technically, yes, I know, maps aren't perfect, but this is all we have to realistically gauge from. So, the line from Vasselheim to Iman is 6 days. So then we look at the line that goes from Jushar to Vasselheim. It's a little bit longer. So I would roughly say, at worst, it's double. So 12 days. So it's been 15 days at the lowest point. So there's easily been enough time for them to get there. However, we do have to keep in mind that they likely had to go to the other library first and spend some time there. So realistically, depending on how you think that went, which could have been the same way that it went for Laudna and Imogen at the beginning of the campaign, which was go away, you're not really worth our time to come into our library, or they spent a day there. Like I said, 15 days, it only takes 12 days at the worst to get to Vasselheim from Jushar. We kind of don't have very many issues here. It's likely they're in Jushar right now, based on that timing alone, if they could get onto a skyship. But there are other ways for them to have transported around. mainly transportation circle. So realistically, we do know that Prism is a high enough level to have the spell Transportation Circle. So she could have used it to taking them to another circle that she knows. She is part of the Cobalt Soul, which we know based on Campaign 2's events that almost every single Cobalt Soul headquarters has a teleportation circle in the belly of their own headquarters there. So the only question from that point is, does she know it? Maybe, and that's a big maybe. But she's from the Iman headquarters, so if she does know the Iman one, then she hops on a airship from there. It only takes 6 days to get to Vasselheim, so they can waste 2 days in Jushar, teleport over to Iman, and then from there go to Vasselheim. And we know that teleportation is currently working somewhat, so this is a plausible way for them to travel as well. So realistically, at best, they've made it in like 8 days. At worst, they've made it in 12 to 14 days, which is still less than the amount of time that has been since the party have been traveling around. But then on top of that, you have to think about the fact that the party have now been in Vasselheim for 2 days, plus the time they're going to be spending in the Fey Realm now, which is another day. So they've now spent 3 more days, which has given the other group more time. So when they go back to Vasselheim again, they should run into the party. They should run into each other. There is no way, unless they have taken 15 plus days in the Jushar library, which I highly doubt, then that's the only way they can't run into each other. They should be running into each other right now, unless they've had to take other modes of transportation, the only other one being a boat from Jushar to Vasselheim, but that is ungodly slow compared to an airship. So realistically, it's not even an option for them. However, even if it makes sense for them timeline-wise to meet up with the other group, it's likely not going to happen. The Bell's Hells are likely not going to meet up with Deanna, F.R.I.D.A, and Prism in Vasselheim, and it's for one reason and one reason alone, and that is real-life reasons. Because, do you guys remember what episode 64 looked like when they had all of them at the table at the same time? What it looked like to have everybody there. They had Deanna, F.R.I.D.A, and Prism there, plus the Bell's Hells. Yeah, that was nuts, right? When they had literally everybody there. I think the number was 10. They had 10 people there. Yeah, well, now add Dorian, because Robbie is also there now. So now there's going to be 11 people at the table. So realistically, that's really cramped. Now, if they're only there for roleplay reasons, that's not a big issue, and especially if they're not there for too long. And maybe you could put Abria on the other side of the DM screen with Matt, and the two of them could sit over there, which will open up a bit more space. But it was really cramped the last time they had a bunch of people over there. So the likelihood of this happening just in real life isn't very good. But there are ways around it, because there's only one reason I want the groups to sort of convene. I only want them to meet up for one reason, and that is so the party can tell F.R.I.D.A about FCG. I desperately need this to happen. I need to see this reaction, and I damn well know that I need to see it because it has to be in the animated series. I need to see the fucking reaction to this, because that's just a big deal. The death of FCG is probably the most emotional part of the campaign thus far, so to add on to it with the reaction of their partner would be massive, especially for me because, you know, I quite enjoyed the time that FCG and F.R.I.D.A spent together. So for me to see this reaction would be a nice way to wrap up that part of the campaign. And with every session that passes, I desperately miss FCG. So to get that final bit of closure on them, because I'm pretty sure Dancer has been told already about FCG's fate. If not, there does still need to be some closure there as well. But I just want to see F.R.I.D.A's reaction to this. And that's the only reason I really care about them meeting up so much. So, with that being said, they only need to bring in one player. They only need to bring the F.R.I.D.A player in, whose name escapes me for some reason. They only need to bring him in. So, when in Vasselheim, they could have split up and done various different things. Prism could be in the library, Deanna could be dealing with injured people after the zombie assault, and F.R.I.D.A could just be doing whatever the hell F.R.I.D.A wants to be doing, especially in Vasselheim. Do they want to take a question at their faith? Do they want to go to the Changebringer's place and sort of pray for FCG? Like, what does F.R.I.D.A do in their free time away from Deanna? Run into the Bell's Hells and have a roleplay session with them. I feel like that, to me, could work really well, and you would only be adding one more seat to the 8 player seats, making it 9. So that to me could be the way that we get F.R.I.D.A in on the conversation to see that reaction. So there you have it. Where are they? We don't know. I would like them to be in Vasselheim right now because I really just need F.R.I.D.A to learn about FCG. That way I can have that moment when they eventually animate Campaign 3. But anyway, besides that, I would like to know what you guys are thinking of for this entire thing. Do you think that they are in Vasselheim? Do you think they're still fucking around in Jushar? Could they be somewhere else completely irrelevant for the conversation? Would you guys like to see F.R.I.D.A's reaction to FCG? Would you like to see the other players come back at all? Would you like to see a mess of 11 people sitting at the table and Matt looking at every single one of them going, what the hell do I do now? Because I think that would be funny. Now that I think about it, 11 people sitting at the table would be quite the sight and would be insane. Because we already had 10, so 11 would be that much funnier. But anyway, let me know what you guys think about this whole situation. Should they show up? Should they not show up? And yeah, and I'll see you guys on Tuesday for whatever video I make next. Peace.